Yesterday, we talked about why we get influenced by others. But apart from why we get influenced by others, maybe it's way more interesting to know how we get influenced by others. Now, that we get influenced by others, I don't think that we have to talk about that part. The question, of course, is it in a positive manner? Is it in a neutral way? Or is it in a negative manner? Now, yesterday, when I talked about the why behind influence and what that does to people, I talked about things like trust, about things like about fear, the experiences, and trust probably is there right on the top. I talked about motivation and about dreams. I talked about how parents get influenced by teenagers who still have dreams. I talked about children being influenced by adults, parents or a single parent, teachers, their siblings, their friends at school, their enemies at school, or the ones who don't care. So the bullies basically. Well, if they don't care, that's okay too. So and then I also talked about the workplace. I talked about managers who say certain things and don't live up to it, especially when there's a change in management. I talked about when people are fearing for their job because of reorganizations, about mergers. There's a whole lot which influences us when it comes to life, how we act, mindset, who we are, what we do, and how we go through life. Let's think about that for a moment. How do we actually go through life? Are we happy? Are we bubbly? Are we like, sure, there's always an outcome. There's always a way out. If one door closes, another door opens. Or are we the people who are easily depressed and even worse, deal with anxiety? People who have lived through traumas, or better said, experienced traumas, but not yet lived through it and came out on the other side, as in being okay again. So there are a lot of things that influence us. Take how the mind works. And, well, not every mind works the same way as someone else's mind. Take men and women. We are so different. And it shows in the way that we express ourselves. Women talk a lot more compared to men. Men are okay with being silent. Women start to feel uncomfortable when things are too silent. Those are just two differences between men and women. And women usually use more words to explain something, as in different variations. Basically, it also comes down to what I said. Men are okay with being silent, and women not so much. But when it comes to taking care of the family, then yes, that part of talking to people and in the meanwhile figuring out what's going on, it's so important. Whereas for men, of course, they had to hunt, so they were silent. Okay, so that's the part when it comes to difference between men and women. But then, of course, there are also people who literally perceive things different. They are missing a filter, or there's an extra filter. Usually it's more in the along the lines of missing a filter and not always realizing what they are doing. So sometimes we need to wonder when we actually communicate with people, do we get across? And if so, how do we get across? And well, that's basically what I'm talking about today, about the how. Now, I wrote a few things down, and I don't know if you remember this, but I told you that I based this influence challenge on 3 examples that I was asked to contribute to on LinkedIn. One was about children, how to build more resilience in children. The next one had to do with projects in the workplace, how to get people to cooperate together. And the third one had to be, what if your client is in a crisis situation? And the funny thing is, it may seem so differently in every area, but there is so much that all these areas have in common. So let's start with experience. Now, when we talk about children, you would say they don't have much experience in life, which is true. The bigger issue actually is that they are not capable yet of categorizing it in a way that we can as adults. So for them being rational about things, that part is still developing. So we as older people, parents, teachers, aunties, friends, whoever, are the ones who are supposed to guide them in that process. So they can build self-esteem, confidence, and courage. So they know what they can say and what they cannot say, what's normal and what's not normal. So we, as older people taking care of the kids, get to understand, hey, this is what this child is sensitive to. Okay, so this is something that we need to take into consideration. Some people or some children, they learn a little bit slower, others learn a little bit quicker. Some need attention, some need they need to be able to actually take a break and move. Well, actually, all children need to move, but at some point we decided they need to be in the school system, and so they need to be silent and sit still. That's not how the human being was built. The human being needs to move around and do anything but sit still. It's not good for the human body. And what do we do as adults? We sit still. Why? Because we've been trained to do so. So there are a lot of things when it comes to children that we as adults should supervise. So we can see, hey, how is that kid doing? If we see that the child is quiet and withdrawn, which, well, probably is the opposite of resilient, it could be a way of coping. So I'm not going to say it's not them being resilient, but we want a child which, apart from silent and withdrawn, which usually are clues that it's not going that well with that child, with the kid, we want them to be energetic, bubbly, lively, to dare to talk to other people, dare to talk to adults, dare to talk to other children, dare to play with other children, and not sit on their own in a corner. Well, I was one of those kids who did. I can tell you that's not the way it was supposed to be. And, I would live in my own world. I would do my own math. I remember that we were to work with dice and numbers on there. Those were the things that I like to do. I probably played with dolls. At least I did at home. I don't remember playing with other children. All I remember is that they took a card from me and then they threw it to one another. And I think that was the end of it. So, yeah, for me, kindergarten was already the first meeting with other children where I was like, I don't get you. I don't understand you. Now, the question, of course, is, had something changed if teachers had stepped in? If they had made sure that I would have gotten the card back? I still know that it was a card from my great aunt. And she was a lovely person, very creative. I don't remember resenting going to school. So let's be specific about that one. And that's probably because I was living in my own world. Nowadays, of course, things are different. First of all, how parents are viewed is different, especially how women are viewed. So if women would go to school and say something about it, which my mom did, then women were often seen as hysterical. I remember that word being used for my mom. But this had to do with the people doing research after how people were supposed to behave, generalizing behavior, and then taking the men as a role model instead of saying, hey, there are both men and women. But yeah, women were a little more difficult to grasp, especially when they would have their monthly period. So, hormones influence things. And, well, you want to study a steady subject. So, women, hello, men. And of course, that wasn't good. Well, nowadays, parents are being listened to, but still, we sometimes need to speak up. When things are not going the right way, we want to express so. And why? Because we want to make sure that the child is safe and the child is challenged and the child wants to grow instead of retreating and not asking anything anymore. So there are a number of signals that you can watch or look out for when it comes to children. And by the way, this is not only children. This also is the same for those clients, and it's also the same for people in working places. And it has to do with how do they interact with other children or with other people. And do they actually participate when it comes to certain chores or tasks or, things along those lines? And again, the energy, are they bubbly? Are they lively? Or do they suddenly change? Now, let me just move back from the school situation. So, in order to make those kids resilient, first of all, do all those things. Observe them, encourage them, make sure they are heard, seen, and understood. So if they come to you, don't, you're stupid, don't say those things. That's not good for a child. But instead, listen, take the time, and also do something with it. If you promise something to a child, then follow up on it. So going to the workplace and to projects, there are a lot of people who have had negative experiences. Of course, there are also people who have good experiences. And I guess it all comes down to what kind or what type of person one is. So are you a person who is pretty much comfortable with life, as long as there are colleagues there, you can get your food somewhere, and, well, you're sort of challenged, but not too much. And, well, it's nice to go through the day. You know what you need to do. You can anticipate what you need to do, and not too much is being asked from you. And, well, depending on who you are and your character, you will say, well, if there's too much work, well, that's the way it is. Bye. At the end of the day, I go home. And then there are, of course, a lot of people out there who say, oh my God, work is not done, and this needs to be done, and this and that and the other. And they get stressed. And that's how people get a burnout. Too much work for too little people. Now, all of this, and then we get back to the kids. what did we say about children? They need to be heard, seen, and understood. There is some form of observation going on. Now, when you become an adult, observation is usually not something that goes on at the workplace. But then again, when there's a manager, there's a supervisor, is this only about numbers? Is this only about how good you have solved things? Or is this also about how happy are you? How bubbly? How energized are you? How do you interact with your colleagues? Are you at meetings? Are you happy? And if I go to the question, which was posted on LinkedIn, about how do you get people to cooperate in projects? Well, then we get back to all the experiences. So one of the first things I thought about was, well, let's get back to the children. If you are working and you're a parent, and let's say you're a single parent, then you need to be home in time, because you need to be there to pick up the children or be home when the children come home. And well, I realized that back in the days, usually children had two parents, unless of course something had happened to one parent and they were no longer around. But the divorce rate wasn't as high as it is now. So a lot of things have changed. Now, the good news is that we are able to work from home. Well, most of the time, of course, certain professions won't allow that. I mean, if you are a caregiver, then you take care of someone, so you need to be in the vicinity. But when we talk about administrative work or things you can do on the phone or things you can do online, then of course that's way less necessary to be there. And yeah, in the past, you would have times that you needed to be in and stay in, and times before you were able to leave. But what if you had to visit other clients or suppliers? Did they take that into consideration too? And how did that work with clocking in and clocking out? And I can tell you, it seems so obvious that, well, people know that, right? So they won't hold that against you. Well, think again, they do. Because when managers don't pay attention to what you do, they don't understand why you are not indoors. And that's what I mean. How observing are managers, how observing are supervisors? Are they actually people managers with people skills? Well, when it comes to kids, then we expect teachers to have had training to know about children and how to handle children. But nowadays, there are so many different children, each with their own thing which is going on. Some are very hyper, they have to move all the time. Other people are like, oh my God, don't click that pen all the time, because then they get distracted. So that's entirely the opposite. And well, then there are the ones, like I said, who may need a little extra work, a little extra challenge, because otherwise they might fall asleep because they're very smart. And there are others who need a little more guidance because otherwise they fall behind. And then there are those who need guidance, as in some specific instructions. And we can take that one directly to the workplace. So what if you don't understand what's being asked from you? Nowadays, people think that if they say, go do this, that you know what it is. But what if you never had any explanation? Or what if there are multiple possibilities? What if someone would actually take the time to explain a thing or two, instead of, well, there's a database, there's a computer, go figure it out yourself. And I can still remember one of those first days that I started at IBM. Great company to work at. I loved it. I was like a kid in a playground, especially because I was in the IT, and I had my good moments and I had my not so good moments. I don't think that was because of the institute, IBM, but I do believe it had to do with some of the people that were being hired. So at first, I was so immensely happy. And here's the thing, I could do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, as long as the job got done. So I had to travel over an hour just to get to where everyone would be. And then I pretty soon found out that there were also locations way closer to home. So it was about whether or not I wanted to meet up with the colleagues. And actually, the question was, would they actually be there if I would go to that one specific location? Now, apart from that, I had no clue what to do. And the good thing is, they saw it and the people took care of me. So I felt safe, I felt secure. If I needed explanations, I could ask them pretty quickly. I found out when they would be around, when they would go home, when which person would be where. And we also had a way of communication through the online system. There already were chat functions back then. They just called it a little bit differently. And a lot of people saw it as, oh, we are being monitored if it's on and we are actually working. Now, getting back to the whole project, I don't know if you listened yesterday or the other times that I talked about working with other people, but I was in a company that was hired to provide people with certain knowledge, with certain skills when they didn't have enough people. And those situations often applied when there was a fusion, a merger going on. So you would say, well, then there are enough people, right? Because, you know, to companies deliver people who are skilled in a certain thing, and then all of a sudden, the number of tasks should reduce, which is often not the case, but in ideal situation it would be true, and then you would have too many people. But what if those people don't know what to do? What if they are not eager to ask it to their new colleague, because it's a new colleague, they haven't known that colleague for all their lives? So when you work somewhere, then we are talking usually about spending like 8 to 9 hours together. And depending on the amount of days that you work together, it's like, 3 to 5 days a week. And back in the days, it would be 5 days a week, 8.5 hours at least, so 8 till 9. And then you get to know one another pretty well. And of course, there were direct lines, because you would usually be in a room with, I don't know, 6 to 10 people. And there would be clusters of desks of people working together until, of course, all of that stopped because it had to be more efficient. And gone was all the security, and they didn't know what to expect anymore. Which brings me to anticipation. So anticipation is important for kids. We talked about them going to school. So when do they need to be where? So for the little children, of course, they need to know that mom is maybe leaving them behind. That's the way it feels for them. But mom also picks them back up, or dad leaves them behind and picks them back up, or they switch roles. Could be anything. So children need to learn. And at first, they usually start crying when they are left out there because they don't know. They have no experience yet. And then at some point, they realize, oh, it's actually fun at school, especially at kindergarten when they still can play. And, at some point, they get picked up. Now, when they are alone at the playground, at the schoolyard, then that's a little bit difficult. But, well, trusting that every parent or caretaker, or whoever it is, picks up the children, they are good to go. And till that time, well, there's probably a teacher or someone else taking care of them. And nowadays, of course, we have after school programs which are arranged the way they should be. So the children get picked up from school, go to daycare or whatever it is, and or after school, and that's where they can do things too. They need to know what they can expect. And of course, they also need to be prepared. Then we get back to the adults. We have to make sure that the kids have their stuff with them, whether it's notebooks and pencils or stuff to go to the gym. And that isn't very different from when they grow up and need to know which location do we need to go to, and then at some point when they're working, which meetings do I have, where are those meetings, which location are they at, what can we expect during the day. So sometimes certain days are dedicated to certain projects, and other days you do the things business as usual. Nowadays, one could say that usually the Tuesdays and the Thursdays are the days that people have meetings, which also means that you need to leave in time, because otherwise it's going to be very busy on the road. No, scratch that, it's going to be busy on the road. But, as long as they know what to expect, and as long as agreements that have been made when you started working somewhere, and also during the time that you have been working somewhere, especially when others are depending on you. So like with children, for instance, or maybe people you take care of who are ill or older, then, you want to know what to expect. And so when we go to the projects, we are talking about interacting with new people you usually don't know. So it could be a very small project, maybe something within the department, but it could also be cross departments. And what has been said, do those agreements that we talked about, so you can pick up the children or whatever it is you need to do. Maybe it's about working in your own business several days a week. Is that still possible? So your private life, does that still fit in with work life? Now, it's always a little bit challenging when it comes to projects, especially when you are talking about multiple people coming from different locations. But as long as people listen to what the other one wants and needs, there is always a way to adapt, whether it's by doing a meeting on the phone, doing it through Zoom online, or whether they are there in person and maybe they leave a little bit earlier. Maybe it's another colleague who can pick up where the other one had to go home. And it's also a lot about communication. What has been said, what has been discussed, what decisions have been made. And if one person is in a project and that person is part of an entire department, you tell the department what's going on. Is there time for it? Do they even think about it? Is there some sort of evaluation? And on the other hand, if you are part of a project and you are dedicating your time and effort and energy to it, then do you get information back? So what happens with everything that you are doing? So you want to work towards a goal. And well, that goal is something that, of course, is something that children also need. Like, okay, you need to do at least this amount of calculations, or we want you to write this amount of pages in a book, or we want you to read this chapter, or we want you to perform some special project. I don't know. You think about it, and there are tons of assignments for kids. Now, when we do something out of the extraordinary, whether it's as a child at school or whether it's in a project. It's nice if people take notice of what you're doing and that they actually give you feedback. Oh, that's job well done, or hey, what were you thinking when you were doing this? And take me with you so I can understand it. Oh, yeah, that's actually pretty good. Well, love it. Or have you thought about this and that? Well, it would be helpful if, and then in that way, people can get different ideas across and they can actually take the feedback from the department back into the project. But when you work on something so specific, it's nice to still feel part of your own department. And it feels nice that people actually are interested in you, especially the managers and the supervisors, but also the other colleagues. And the same, of course, applies to children. When they do something special, they like it if their parents know what's going on. And if the teacher is there and shares, hey, well done, and sometimes even with children, it goes way beyond one school and we talk about multiple platforms. Now, especially with people working long hours, there are nannies or there are other people who take care. Like I said, there can be after school programs. And then again, it's about communication, what's going on. So when I was talking about that observing element should always be there, even when we are grown-ups, even when we are adults. And well, sometimes that can be a partner, but if there's no partner, maybe it's friends, maybe it's siblings, depending on your age, it can be parents or not. So with colleagues, there are always other people who can monitor what's going on with someone else. It's all about, do you have the time? Do you have the interest to interact with other people? Maybe you meet other people at the gym and all of a sudden it's like, hey, that person isn't there. What went on? So there's a certain social interaction which makes it possible to notice, hey, someone is doing okay or someone is not doing okay. When someone suddenly is nowhere to be seen, then hopefully someone somewhere picks up on it and says, hey, how are you doing? Are you okay? And well, let's meet up. Now I'm going to expand this to clients and, well, me being a coach. Yes, I'm also a therapist. Yes, I'm also a trainer. I'm a bunch of things when it comes down to it. I also guide people to be able to live their life the best way possible, especially when not being able to understand what's being asked from them. And when they're very sensitive for unexpected events. And well, and there are also a lot of people that when it comes to something emotional, or they are in a very emotional state, information goes out there. So they only absorb parts of the information. And that's why it's good to have someone there who is not emotionally involved and just can write things down. That's why it's nice when people actually write things down during a meeting or something. But again, it requires communication. And we don't want that communication to be there like every once in a year or maybe every half year. We want that to be on a regular basis. And that includes when we're talking about the workplace. Just let people know, how are you doing? Now, when I talk about being in contact with my clients, that's at least once a week. Sometimes it's more often. It actually depends on how much time the other one has and how much attention they need. And well, depending on the circumstances, I might be talking to people a little bit more or a little bit less, and sometimes a lot more compared to normal. Like I said, it all depends on what's going on. And usually when I start to guide clients, there's a reason why I come into play. So especially with the local ones, you can bet when I come around and they ask for me because other people said, oh, you need to go to Lady Lexi, something is going on. Somewhere they got stuck in life, whether it's at college, whether it's at home, whether it's at the workplace, somewhere they got stuck. And well, communication needs to be improved and sometimes also just basically started up. So it could be that they react differently, they see things differently, they interpret information differently. It could also be literally the circumstances that they cannot deal with, which drives them nuts. And well, so every client has something. And well, I've seen just about anything from people being woken up nonstop by neighbors or the people which are around them to people. Well, let's start with the safety. So when I talked about trust, I'm also referring to safety. So safety to know that you can go to someone, safety that you know that someone won't all of a sudden storm through the door, that there's not all of a sudden a sudden overwhelm of noise. Those are things which can be very important. And when all of a sudden those things changes and my clients are exposed to all kinds of sounds, smells, touch, whatever it is, well, that can be upsetting to them. Actually, I'm one of those people too. That's why I know them so well, or at least understand them so well. Just recently, I got new neighbors behind me. They love house music. Now, I don't mind house music, but I do mind it when it's low volume, loud volume, low volume, loud volume. And especially when I cannot think myself anymore, then yeah, that's a problem. So earlier this night, well, actually yesterday, I think, or the day before, I talked to, there was three of them. And I talked to one day, to two the other day. And I said, I work at night, which includes in the weekend. I have my challenges, I go live, and I don't want any music audible because when I record things and it goes to YouTube, what do you think is going to happen? Oh, we need to mute that person. Well, thank you. That means that my voice is being muted too. Well, I don't want any copyright claims, so please do me a favor. Don't let it resonate through the walls. Well, these neighbors are very kind. And well, earlier I walked up to them and I said, well, I would really like to go live at a certain time. Do you think that in half an hour you can just drop the bass? Well, they've done so. It's actually kind of quiet. And quite honestly, I didn't expect them to go on till after midnight. But talking about those things when it comes to sensitivity, when we talk about people being in crisis, it often has to do with certain traumatic events. So triggers, input, and we want to know what is going on. And then we get back to observation. So getting to know the person, figuring out what has been going on. Do you remember that I talked about communication, especially when it came to children, that we want to know how was their day, what happened at school or after school, at home. Those things are important. Same when you are at your workplace. It's nice that your colleagues know if something specific is going on and you cannot be around all the time or you feel not so good. And when people actually, inform like, hey, okay, so this is what it is. So we can call it social control. So we keep an eye on one another. We look out for one another, and other people will say, well, that's way too controlling for me. Please. But, some observation and, also just checking, are things going the way they should? That already helps a lot. Now, when it comes to my clients, of course, I want to know what's been going on in their lives. And depending on whether I can get to talk to them or not, that usually says a lot. If something is going on and I cannot reach them, then usually there's a crisis going on, which actually means that I need to be on top of things. But when people are not used to other people helping them out, then of course the question is, will they let me know? So when things are out of the ordinary, like I said, that's a sign that you want to observe. Now, talking about clients in crisis, what they need is some form of normality. So they need to be able to calm down and to relax and take a break, take some distance from whatever it is that is going on. Well, in order to know what that means, you need to figure out what has happened. And you also need to know what calms people down, what makes them feel at ease. And do you remember that I said, when we talk about children, it's what's their energy like? Are they bubbly? Are they lively? Are they withdrawn? Adults, are they depressed? Do they have anxiety? Well, the whole thing, it's basically something that's going on all through our lives, including when people are older and they are not able to socialize that easily anymore. They still want to be in touch with other people, or at least have something to do. It depends on who they are and what they want. And not everyone wants company all the time. And some people need time to process their own things. And some people need time to actually do what it is, whatever they want to do. So, but it's just that basic, just keep in touch for a moment, phone call, a text message, dropping by, but don't do it unannounced. So make sure that people know what to expect. So when I talk about people in crisis, then you want to get back to something that's familiar to them and which doesn't give them any more stress or any more triggers. So they need to go back to safety. And there's also another thing when it comes to the brain. So the brain knows about certain things. It knows certain things which are going on, and it also reacts to certain things. The only thing is that when it comes to mindsets and triggers, especially when they come into existence at a young age, so between 0 and 7, a lot of children do not know about those mindsets, and they are not made based on logic, because ratio is something they haven't developed yet. So it's based on emotions, and that could be related to sounds and smells and touch and being in a specific environment. So little things, even the words, can trigger an emotion in someone. And it's important to know about these things. Now, here's the thing. When growing up, those things that we experienced as a kid, the ones that were there to keep us safe, but not based on logic or ratio, well, they're still with us when we are adults. And then all of a sudden, it can kick in. And we need to know what's happening and why does it kick in? What was triggered? What was the reason for that trigger, so we can take it away. Now, just like there are children who can sit still and children who cannot sit still, there are children with allergies, there are children who are sensitive to touch, they're also sensitive to certain clothing, they are sensitive to sounds, or certain sounds, that might be true too. And the more you know about this when they are still children growing up, the more you can teach them how to deal with it when they grow up and enter adult life. And of course, the question is, when you start to work at some point, what do you know? And do those people that you've never met before, who become your colleagues, those managers who might not even be around all the time, do they actually know you? And do they know what's going on with you? We don't have to disclose any medical information nowadays, at least not over here in the Netherlands. So how would they know what's going on? And then we talk about the whole topic of speaking up and speaking out. So those who know me for a longer period of time know that I am known as Lady Lexi Speaks Up. So my motto is speak up, speak out, share your story. And that's what I teach others. So when we talk about influence, the one thing that I do is make sure that one person understands the other one, or one party involved understands the other one. And I don't necessarily work with children. I do talk to parents. I usually come in the picture when they are like somewhere in their 20s and up from there. Well, there are a lot of people my age actually not knowing what's going on with them. And apparently, men are more prone to drink more alcohol compared to women. I don't know if that's true. It's something that I read. I've seen women drinking just like men, but apparently men go for booze more easily. So I'll assume that's based on research data, because I've read it somewhere based on data. And well, it's what I always say is it's about wanting to flip the switch, not forever, but for a little while. And basically what that switch does is it's a reset. So when people are in distress, when they have a panic attack of some sort, then when there's an overwhelm, there's an overload. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a panic attack. That can also be highly emotional. Then we need to figure out how can we trigger that switch back so everything relaxes. Now, when I said the brain is a smart cookie and it knows a lot of things, there's also one thing that the brain, well, there's a little way you can trick the brain a little bit. So when someone is highly emotional, when you get them to focus on something else, and that's the hard part, just starting them to be able to focus on something else. Whether it's going up and down the stairs, whether it's singing a birthday song, whether it's doing mathematics, it doesn't matter. As long as it's something that is non-emotional, that's when you can pull people out of that situation. And actually the opposite can happen too. People can get in a very emotional situation based on sounds, things they see, but also doing repetitive things. So usually when we want to create some sort of momentum and inspiration, it's good to be in a surrounding where it's a little bit more quiet. And it could be in the shower. I mean, it doesn't get more repetitive than in the shower. Of course, there are always exceptions. People who cannot handle the sound of the drops, and people who actually feel the ache when those drops come down. But usually when you are, say, walking outside, or you are on your bike, or you are in a traffic jam, that's when boredom kicks in. And when boredom kicks in, that's actually the sign that we can get some inspiration. So the chatterbox falls silent because we're talking about boredom. And then the underlying layer gets the chance to actually get out there and come up with suggestions and ideas. So that's why when you are working out or you're taking a shower or whatever you are doing, also close to waking up and before you fall asleep, that's when you get the ideas. Now, it's important that we also take those breaks and the downtime during the day. And we can get back to the children. Children need breaks to recharge. Remember, I said it's important to monitor how much energy we have, how bubbly we are. And then we can take that same thing and we can look at the workplace. What's going on? We know the things which are called an after lunch dip or an after dinner dip. So when people have eaten so much that their sugar level is going all haywire, and well, the blood goes from the brain to the stomach to process things, and they get tired and sluggish all of a sudden. So that's why it's good to actually go outside, get some fresh air. So here's the thing, it actually is a contradiction, because when you want blood to go to the stomach and you are going to walk outside, then all of a sudden that same blood that you need for processing your food actually goes to your limbs. So, well, interesting. How are you going to work around that? But yes, fresh air, oxygen, different environment, closing your eyes, doing some Tai Chi, basic walking around, just, going up and down the stairs. It makes such a big difference. Now, of course, when we're talking about workplaces, then we need to be as efficient as possible. So taking breaks, it's monitored by the minute if you're out of luck. And well, we need to rush to be in at a certain time, even when there aren't any meetings, just because, well, you need to be in at a certain time, which of course causes stress. And all of those things are things we don't want. We want people to be at ease, whether we're talking about the children or we are talking about adults. And when we're talking about clients, people get coached for different reasons. So it could be that they want challenges, they want to grow, they are entrepreneurs, they want to figure out how to make their business work, or things are going on in their business because they are a boss or a manager and they have employees and they do not know how to handle this. It could be that they are the employee and they do not know how to handle their bosses and what to say to them. And especially when you are used to listen and keep quiet, remember what we're teaching the kids, then it's going to be hard. And if you talk to people, and again, it starts with when children are little and parents do not listen to them, caregivers do not listen to them, when caretakers do not listen to them, teachers don't listen to them, or one does and the other doesn't, promises are not kept, then of course that already has its toll on how you look at the world. So when we talk about trust and safety, those things are already things that are, well, the basis, the foundation starts with growing up when you are still young. And again, ratio still doesn't set in then. It takes till at least 7 years old before ratio actually starts to kick in. And one can say it usually is linked to going to school and all those kind of things. So then they learn to use that ratio. Now, of course, when not all people are the same, I already talked about it. We're talking about some form of autism, about ADHD, about being more clever than other people, being prone to sensory input, you name it. It could also be something physical going on, and because of it, not being able to participate the way other people would, maybe not having the same amount of energy other people do. It could also be about starting up, not being able to speed read or not being able to immediately grasp a certain new topic and taking your time to really get acquainted with it. Maybe because you don't stay on a superficial level, but actually you go into a very detailed level before you're satisfied. It's kind of funny if you think about it. So you take more time, so it feels like you're slower, but actually you want to be more detailed. Well, again, so many people, so many differences. Also, depending on culture, location, where you've grown up, what you've experienced. And then we haven't even talked about the traumatic events that you can experience, not only as a child, but also, of course, as a grown up. Now, all these things, and then we get back to observation, communication, trust, agreements. Those things are so important. And if we don't talk to one another, then first of all, the other doesn't know what's going on. But if we do talk to the other and there is no response, that's not going to sit very well. So we want to do something with what the other one tells us. So first of all, the question, of course, is, do we need to take action? So what is it the other one wants from you? And then second of all, what are you going to do when someone asks you something specific? So a lot of people won't ask what the other one wants because, oh my God, what if they're held to it? That could be very problematic. But if you want to know how to influence others, how to be a role model, then observe other people, talk to them. If you want other people to be your role model, again, observe, talk to them. Figure out what is it they find interesting, what is it that they need. That's how we can actually influence one another. And when it comes to equals, again, talk to one another. Is there time? Is there a possibility? Is distance a problem? Is language a problem? Especially when we're talking about adults, including different expressions. Is it the way one perceives things compared to the other one? Is it because one has certain goals which the other one doesn't have? We need to talk about all those things to understand where is one person coming from and where are you coming from and what do you want to get out of life, out of work, out of your dreams, and maybe even basic survival, just being able to thrive in this world. I mean, not everyone has the same mobility that I do. Well, better said, I don't have the same mobility that most people have. So, those are the little things. And like I said, some people are prone to sounds, to touch, to sight, to light. Just think about that. What effect do certain circumstances have on other people? Now, if we want to influence people and we want them to work together, then we need to know what makes them what I call tick. And you want to know how they respond in a positive way and what they need when certain things are not going the way they should. So what can you do to make people relax, to take a break, to get into that momentum, to get into that flow, instead of saying you need to do this, that, and the other, and always being efficient. You need to work. You can't sit still. Or you need to sit still, but you need to do something, but you cannot not do anything. Those are the things that usually don't work. We don't want to pressure people. Of course, we want people to do something, but give them a specific target, specific goal. See if they actually like doing what it is they want to do and how they deal with it. And you already get a lot of information. So when we talk about influence, a lot starts with ourselves. What do we observe? Who do we observe? And what do we share? If we don't speak up and speak out, then no one knows. So let's start with communicating a little bit better. Tomorrow we are going to talk about mindset, and well, we are going to talk about how we influence ourselves. Want to see more Monday morning messages? Then click here, go there, yes, right there.